It's a huge honor for me today to have the Burmese Python, Nicola, on the show. I've been following her on Instagram, and this is the person who inspires me the most. When I look at her feed, there's always something positive, and given the state of the world and given social media, the state of social media, it's so refreshing to have somebody so positive in the online space. Before we do that, please smash the like button and like, subscribe, comment, share, all of those nice things so that we can get this interview out to more people. I read through the list of your accomplishments, and I thought, I don't think I've done this in 35 years, let alone 28. You're 28, right?
I am, but that was just the list for
the last year. Yeah. So I don't think I've done that in 35 years. So how do you do it? Like, you mentioned you bought a house, a second house. You mentioned you got a promotion at work. You're now a pro boxer as well, so you've signed a contract for that. How do you manage to do all of that?
Yeah, so I know it sounds so cliche, but it honestly is just pure hard work. And, a lot of people see all the achievements and the accolades along the way, but I have to sacrifice so much to get there. And in some cases it can be quite lonely. But for me, it's always being able to step back, look at the bigger picture and really understand, this, just like a small sacrifice that I'm making now, just the impact it will have later on. And it just means that, even if it just brings me like a day closer to my goal, okay, let's do it. And then once you get into that rhythm of being comfortable, of knowing what your own priorities, values are, it then just makes conversations with other people so much easier to make sure that, yes, I am saving money so that I can, be able to buy another home and, saying no to things which don't serve me.
Have you always been...
And then... Oh, go on.
Have you always been so focused, or has that been something that you've developed?
No, I wouldn't say I was always so focused. It was definitely developed over the years, and I think that might have been due to the sleeping condition that I had, which was narcolepsy as a kid. So not a lot of people are familiar with what narcolepsy is, but essentially your brain just switches off and you are out asleep for hours in addition to your normal sleeping pattern. So it was typically in the middle of school, about 11 o'clock, I'd fall asleep and I wouldn't wake up till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'd miss the whole of school, and then I'd wake up in the evening briefly and then go back to bed again. So I was just asleep for a lot of my childhood. So the focus in terms of being there, I didn't know when a sleeping episode was going to come on, and no one could ever wake me, because it almost sounds a bit silly. You just pinch them or throw water in their face or get them to walk or get them to do something active and they'll stay awake. But I never knew it was coming, and I could never be woken up after I did sleep, which my sister enjoyed a lot as a kid, having a sleeping sister that she'd be able to then try and throw popcorn in my mouth if I'd slept with my mouth open. She really enjoyed that, but it did mean that I missed out so much. And I feel, looking back, that's where the focus then came from, having missed out on so much. And then when I went to school, I was so fortunate that my friend circle they were just all really intelligent, and they were all in top set for everything, and I was in bottom set. So I used to get them to try and help tutor me, and you do trades off with gingerbread men and things like that, so that they'd help and it'd be a bit more sort of mutual benefit, just because, I really wanted to be in the same class as my friends. And that's where sort of the focus started growing from.
It's amazing that you were able to navigate that, because that sounds debilitating, to not know when you're going to black out, where you might be. I listened to some of your other interviews, and it was a birthday episode, right, where you fell asleep on the cake and stuff. So that...
I did, and my whole fringe caught on fire.
I heard that story, and it sounds unbelievable, because most people probably don't know anybody who has this condition, or so the fact that you're able to deal with it, and it's not very well known and probably not very well understood. It's amazing. So, and the fact that you are able to still get through school and do well is amazing. How did you overcome that condition?
Yeah, so it actually stayed with me for quite a long period of time. I first noticed the episodes getting smaller and less intense when I started Taekwondo. So that was sort of my first move into the martial arts world. But But I had narcolepsy all the way up until I went to university, and I used to fall asleep in lectures as well. So I used to have to take a dictaphone to record the lecture. So should I fall asleep, that I'd actually still have it at the end, and someone would just press stop, and at some point I'd have the opportunity to listen back to it. But I think you just find ways to work around it. I think for me that was my normal, and so I didn't know anything else. It was just sort of like, okay, well, if this is what's going to happen, how can I focus on the things that I can control, and like, what can I put in place to make sure that I'm not at a disadvantage? And I think that really helps. And, I've always been really grateful that my friend circle have been, very understanding and always taken it in their stride, that if it did happen and people around me aren't aware, they're quite quick to sort of educate them, like, oh no, she does have narcolepsy, she's not just being like a lazy student, she hasn't just intentionally fallen asleep.
Yeah. And I guess you attract people similar to yourself, right? So you obviously have, like you said, with any relationship, there's give and take. So you're obviously a good friend to them, so they're being good friends to you. As a father, I'm always trying to get my kids more active and get them to do martial arts and sports and stuff. So I know your background is in Taekwondo. What martial art would you recommend for little kids?
I think for children, all martial arts are great. Just in the fact that, broadly speaking, they teach a lot of different things other than, self-defense, which I think is like the driver for a lot of parents. But for me, I really enjoyed Taekwondo. And even looking back, although it's not been, say, the most useful in terms of actual combat, in terms of the morals and foundations that it instilled in me, that's what I think was really powerful, and that's why I'd never change it. So from Taekwondo, it very much became my world and a way for me to live life of, like persevering, having indomitable spirit, showing respect, being courteous, having integrity. Those foundations that were drilled in, I felt just laid such a brilliant, almost, ethos or method for me to live my life.
Amazing. My kids do wrestling at the moment, but with wrestling, there's not really that kind of whole martial art thing where you're learning values. It's more, you learn it through the sport, in terms of you getting beaten up, you learn to be humble and that kind of stuff. But it's not like other martial arts where they're explicitly saying that these are the kind of characteristics we want you to embody.
Yeah, and me as a kid, I was definitely like quite impatient, and probably still have elements of that now. Or when I think I'm being patient and people are like, "You're not, Nick. Like, you're not being patient." Yeah. Having like the grading system behind Taekwondo, you had to wait you had to turn up and train, say, X amount of times for that 3 month, 6 month, year period, and the higher that you progress, the more commitment and dedication you had to show.
That's amazing.
And it didn't matter then how many sessions you were doing. It was actually, you need to do it for this length of time consistently. Yeah. And for me, that was like quite a bit of a personal battle, because I was like, no, I'm turning up. Like, can't we like speed up this process a little bit? Yeah. But then it just made it so much more rewarding when I did get there, because it's like, okay, I've actually worked for this really hard.
And I guess it's good mental training, because with any kind of goal, it's all, like you said earlier, it's that one day at a time. It's taking you closer towards your goal. It's not, and that's going to help with education. That's going to help with other aspects of life as well, not just with the actual martial art. Being able to break down goals and take them one day at a time. And you became world champion.
Yeah, I became a world champion in Taekwondo. And you know what? For that actual fight, I had a cracked rib and a fractured foot.
Wow.
But I knew that going into the fight. So I said to my parents, like, don't come because I'm probably going to lose. But I just want to go because it's the World Championships. And even if I properly break my foot, that's fine. I'll just accept that risk. But I just want to say I've been.
Wow.
So no one came with me. Like, I didn't get my coach didn't fly out. My mum didn't come. I didn't have any fans. And then by some absolute miracle, I think adrenaline has a lot to do with it. It just carries you through pain. I ended up winning. And I remember calling my mum from Canada and being like, I've just won. Can you believe that? And then I was like, it doesn't matter what injury I have in future, you can come, because I don't even know what just happened. I don't even know how I'm the champion right now.
So, I'm thinking about the self-talk that a normal person would have, thinking, oh, there's no way I'm going to do it. It's going to, what's the point of going and stuff. So it just goes to show the kind of strength of character that you have to turn up when you know you have a broken foot in a Taekwondo competition, and a broken rib, so you're going to get hit to the body, and your foot's definitely going to have contact. So that's amazing. Training as a woman. So we spoke earlier. I mentioned that when I was 16, I went to Thailand, and at that point in time, which was probably about 18 years ago, they some gyms wouldn't allow women there. They had this superstition that it would impact the training if there were girls training at the gym. Okay. And now, obviously, from speaking to some coaches, they say girls are better fighters than boys in terms of like the discipline, the ability to pick up techniques and to listen to like coaching cues and that kind of stuff. So, did you experience any stigma in terms of training as a girl?
In Taekwondo, less so, and I think that's because it's not as full contact in comparison. But as I've moved more over into the full contact martial arts, so in the worlds of kickboxing, K1, Muay Thai, Lethwei, which is the Burmese boxing in pure boxing, they're definitely more male dominated. And I'd say, people very much underestimate it, underestimate me as a female. When they're like, you can spar with Nick, and they're kind of like, don't really want to spar with her. She's a girl, like what am I going to learn? And I'm not saying that they need to punch, with 100% power, but actually the technical elements, you can still have a really technical spar. And it's been very a learning process. And I just see it change, and I think a lot of fighters will be able to relate when I say this, is that once a hard shot is landed, I just see something in their face change, and then I know that, now they're going to spar me properly. But it happens almost every time that we need to get to that point first, before then they're like, okay, I'm going to take her seriously and fight her properly, because she can fight, but it's just always a bit of a process to get there. It's never touch gloves, and it will just be immediately like, okay, mutual respect.
Yeah, so probably just it always feels there's going to be that little bit of a curve until you actually connect, and then they're going to be like, okay, I take it seriously, otherwise you're going to knock me out.
No, I literally see it in their face. I can't tell you what happens, but their face changes, and I'm like, okay, I'm 100% switched on now too, because I know that they're coming back.
Yeah, and do you have any issues about you probably predominantly have to train with men, right? Because there's probably not as many females that train in full contact.
So interestingly, and this is one of the key differences between the martial arts, in all the other martial arts I did, kickboxing, Thai boxing, Lethwei, Taekwondo, men and women, they sort of intermix. So I always used to spar men, but having moved over into the realms of professional boxing, actually they separate that out a lot more. But I think it's to do with there being so much of a focus on sort of punches to the head and sort of the differences in power, that actually if I'm sparring in boxing, we typically bring other female fighters to the gym. So there's only a few kilos difference. It's a lot more sort of safer and regulated. And I'd say that's the key difference between sort of boxing sparring versus sort of kickboxing. Otherwise, I'm about like 60 to 64 kilos, depending whereabouts in the fight camp I am. But I'd always spar someone who's maybe like 120 kilos. And, I'd be sweat like a domino almost. And it's like comical watching it back, because I just think I don't feel that like flimsy. But when you're sparring someone who's like 120 kilos, you really notice it. But then again, you become so much more susceptible to injuries. So from a safety perspective, I much rather and prefer the method in boxing.
Yeah, definitely.
It just feels safer.
Yeah, definitely. There's weight classes for a reason, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So with the bare-knuckle fighting, Lethwei, am I saying it right?
Lethwei, that's correct.
Weren't you scared going in there? Because I would be terrified that I'm going to get my nose broken, or my face is going to get
I was petrified. I was so scared. I got there. So for those who aren't familiar with what Lethwei is, it allows punches, kicks, knees, elbows, headbutts, and it's all with no gloves. And so in the UK, feeling very safe and in my comfort zone, I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's go do it. And then, as you say, when I was walking out, I remember saying to my mum, like, who let me do this? Who told me this was a good idea? She was like, everyone has told you. I was like, I don't remember one person telling me that this was a terrible idea. Like my last honest thought was, I think I might die. And then I was like, okay, you've got to go out and fight now. And I know it was a bit dramatic, but I was actually that scared that popped into my mind.
Yeah.
Because I've never even had a street fight. I've never thrown a headbutt, like, to a person. You know, obviously I've been practicing it at the gym on the pads and the bags, but I've never actually thrown a headbutt. So it all just felt quite overwhelming. But at the same time, I just remember thinking, like, you know, if I really didn't want to do this, all I had to do was leave.
Yeah.
Like, no one's forcing me to walk into the ring. Okay, it'd just be a bit of a disappointment for everyone here. But if I don't want to do it, I don't have to do it. And I think that's when I knew I did want to do it.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, I'm not going to walk out, am I? And I was like, okay, so, like, let's just go, let's make our way to the ring. And in, like, 15 minutes or however long the fight's going to take, you know.
It'll be over.
Hopefully, I'll be able to raise my hand and be on, like, cloud 1,000,001, because I'll be so above cloud 9 that I'm just alive. That, you know, it was like a very euphoric moment after that.
That's amazing. You find that people are intimidated of you when they find out that you do this kind of stuff?
Yeah, people are just very surprised. The common thing is, one, you don't look like a fighter, which I think is like that stigma around females having to look very butch, you know, short hair, like incredibly macho all the time, unarticulate. You know, I think they have this stereotype in their mind of what a female fighter is. And then the second thing is, well, you just don't look like you could fight at all. So, you know, you don't look like the typical person, but then it also looks like you just couldn't even throw a punch. So they just, you know, find it hard to believe that until they see actual footage, they're like, oh, wow, okay.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
So that is a common one.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's great that you're breaking, like, shattering people's, you know, the stigma and the kind of belief systems that people have around women and what a female fighter looks like and all that kind of stuff. You're always so positive, and like sometimes it's probably from social media. It seems like, oh yeah, someone's probably only this positive for social media. But I've seen your interviews and obviously the interactions I've had with you. You're always so positive. Have you always been like that, or is it something that martial arts has brought about, or other factors?
I think I've always tried to be really positive. I think it's not that bad things don't happen to me. It's not that, you know, I don't get challenges similar to anyone else, or I don't have problems, or, you know, days where I'm just feeling like, oh, you know, today isn't my day. I wish I could just go back to bed and start the day again. But, you know, I just always try to remember the bigger picture, you know, choose how I respond to like an event, or something, you know, if something and you get like that immediate emotive response, it's like, okay, what's like future Nicola going to thank you for in your response right now? And like, what will she not thank you for? Like, make a decision, like, even given the situation now, that is going to be like the best for everything. And I just think, like, you know, really focusing on what you can control is so important. And it goes so much further than we think.
Have you heard
say that again?
Learned Optimism? Is a book.
No, I haven't. Tell me more.
There's a whole science behind, like, why people should be more positive, and they actually did this study on nuns, and they looked at their lifespan and longevity and health conditions, and they looked at their journals and their diaries, and they found that people who has had a positive frame of mind had less health conditions, like they had lived happier lives, they died later in life and stuff. So there's a massive body of research being done around optimism and that as a tool for health.
That's really fascinating. And I think that's true, you know, because I think I read a war study about soldiers who intentionally, I don't know, if they shot themselves in the foot, for example, and then went back home because they were so happy to be home, they'd recover so much faster because they were happy and everything, than someone who, say, like genuinely was injured and was sent home but didn't want to go home.
Yeah.
And the recovery rates were those who were happier were just like, oh, not instantaneous, but it was significantly quicker. Yeah. So I think there's definitely a lot of value in that.
Yeah, 100%. They actually did the study on dentists, and they pierced a hole in the roof of their mouth, which is a bit of a mean thing to do to anybody. But they were all volunteers, and they did it during exam time when they were in a high stress situation, and they did it during the summer holidays, and they found that the recovery was twice as fast during the time when they weren't stressed compared to when they were stressed.
It's insane, isn't it?
Yeah,
wow.
It's amazing. That brings me on to the question of injuries, because you mentioned 2 injuries in terms of the foot break and the broken rib. How do you manage this, like, and still train?
So I've got a lot smarter around training. Definitely when I first started out, so with Taekwondo, as a great example, I used to train with injuries, during injuries, everything. And, I think because I was younger, my body was like a lot more ready to take on the strain. It recovered a lot quicker, but also then sort of reassessing the sport as a whole and wanting, this to be a genuine career and to have longevity within the sport. Actually, that approach isn't beneficial, and taking the time out to make sure I'm recovering and working on, and not actually like walking on the broken foot or the cracked rib, whatever it should be, will really benefit. But I think, so I had those injuries. I've broken my nose a couple of times. I also tore my knee during sparring. So I tore my ACL, MCL and hamstring and dislocated the joint, like all in the same time. That was probably the most severe. But because of where it fell in terms of my injury cycle, that was maybe just under a year ago. Immediately before that, I was in a really life-threatening car crash. And I say that's probably the only time that I wasn't super optimistic and ended up having PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And being in that mental cycle where actually everything from the car crash in terms of wounds on the outside were healed, but actually like the mental state behind the trauma hadn't been healed, that for me was like the hardest thing to cope with. And so coming out of that and then immediately having the knee injury, honestly, it just felt like a walk in the park in comparison, because that was such like a dark, lonely, isolated period that when it was like, okay, it's an injury, it's got an actual process to recover, it could be so much worse. To put a positive spin on it was just, I don't know, it was just so easy. But you have to go through those like hellish moments, I suppose, to really appreciate, everything that's coming forward.
Is there anything that helped with when you were going through that dark period with PTSD? I know that's something that soldiers often experience, like after combat, and my wife's actually a doctor of psychology, and it's amazing how the nervous system keeps a score of things, because she cut her hand once when she was washing dishes, and every time now when she washes dishes and she's not doing it consciously, she gets that same pain. So the nervous system keeps a memory for these things. So I know with some people who've been in accidents, whenever especially initially when they get in the car again, they've got that fear and anxiety. So is there anything that helped you that may help somebody else who's going through it?
Yeah, that's so true, because I thought that actually I was fine. And I remember it was exactly that, I got back into the car, but I was in the passenger seat and I just hadn't even thought about it until we started moving in the car, and I was like, whoa, you have to stop, I can't be in the car anymore. And then it hit me and I was like, oh Lord, I'm like the body is keeping score, and I'm way more impacted about this than I'd even thought myself. In terms of what helped, it was just I'm going to say blind belief. I just remember having my nose broken once before during sparring, and then when I went back to spar again, I just didn't want to spar. I was like, no, I don't like this anymore. And it was like, no, you do love it, you've loved it forever, this is why you commit your whole life to it, just keep turning up, and one day something will change. And then it did.
Wow.
But it was it wasn't like an overnight process, it was like an overtime thing which happened. And it was almost the same with the car accident, although it felt like infinitely longer, and it felt like nothing I was doing was helping. And every time, I'd go to speak to a mindset coach or a counselor or a therapist, it was all a bit with an eye roll. I knew I needed help, but I just didn't feel like anyone could help me. But I was like, I'll just keep turning up, because maybe some magic will happen along the way. And I'm not doing anything else with my time, so it doesn't feel like I'm losing out. And then, yeah, it was through that that just one day, I remember just laughing one day and being like, oh, I just smiled, which sounds really sarcastic. But I was like, wow, I just had that for 10 seconds. But like, at least we're going somewhere now, you know? And it was like 10 seconds out of the whole day, but like that was a genuine laugh just there. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't one that I had to force or fake anymore. And I was like, oh, that's like the only like glimpse of hope that I needed.
Do you recommend any resources, like books, or not in relation to any topic, any that stick out in your head? If someone said, what's the one book they should read, which one would you recommend?
The one book they should read. So I really enjoyed The Rise of Superman.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard that book before, but the idea behind that book talks about athletes in a really peak mental state called flow, where there's so much, I don't want to say fear, but there's so much, I suppose it is fear in a sense though, but when you read the book you'll get more of an understanding of how that's being defined. But there's so much on the mark, you know, you could literally like die doing the different activities that they're doing, you know, like climbing up the side of the Grand Canyon without any ropes, like free climbing. So in those really peak states, how the mind then starts making decisions and goes into this absolute flow state where you just make a series of many correct decisions, and like world records are broken, and it's all because they're in this just one headspace. So me as an athlete and as a fighter, that's like what I'm aiming to be in when I go into the ring. You know, everything's almost slowed down and you get everything in slow motion. But the only time I've ever had that is actually in the car accidents that I've been in. And I always used to read about it, and people used to tell me like, oh, like everything used to slow down, and I see it all in slow-mo like we do in the films. And I was like, no, that sounds like rubbish. No way is that true. And then when I was in both my car accidents, everything was in slow motion. I was like, wow, so this is what athletes have who are in the zone. Like, how cool would it be to have that in the ring? And so I found that absolutely incredible, that so many different athletes, and they could talk about sort of skateboarders, rock climbers, surfers, who do all these fantastic, incredible, insane things, but all through this flow state within their mind. So yeah, The Rise of Superman, I think, was a great read. I was absolutely fascinated.
I'll add that to the description box so people can pick that up as well. I know they'll enjoy that. And your future in pro boxing, can you tell us about what you're doing next? Like, have you got a fight planned, or are you in camp at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm in fight camp at the moment. It's 4 weeks till my professional boxing debut, which is happening on the 18th of September on Saturday in Essex. So I'm super excited about that. And yeah, this is just the start of another martial art in the world of the Burmese Python. And the goal's always the same, you know, is to try and get as far as I can in all the different disciplines. And this time it's boxing. So yeah.
And I want to come and support you for that. So where can people pick up tickets for the event?
Yeah, so if you just drop me a message on Instagram or Facebook, so at the Burmese Python, message me for tickets and I'll get you all sorted.
One piece of advice that you'd give someone, the tagline of the podcast is inspiring the next generation. So if you had to give the next generation one piece of advice, what would it be?
What would it be? It would be focus on what you can control.
And where can people follow you?
So yeah, you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at the Burmese Python.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Nicola. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.